They're calling it America's most powerful warship backing away from Iran. But that phrasing is already the misdirection, because the real story isn't a ship, it's a system, and the system has a tell. In a truly stable empire, financially stable, politically stable, strategically stable, supercarriers don't back away. They move where they want, when they want, and everyone else recalculates. When the center is strong, force is simple. But when the center is strained, force becomes expensive. And when force becomes expensive, it stops being a weapon and starts becoming a liability, one that can be baited, bled, and politically trapped. So here's the claim that changes everything. What you just watched in the Gulf isn't a moment, and it isn't strategy. It is the predictable output of a multi-step machine that has been running for decades. A machine that converts debt into power, power into overreach, overreach into crisis, and crisis into retreat disguised as restraint. If that sounds dramatic, stay with me, because in the next few minutes you're going to see why this is not a theory. It's a pattern with a math problem inside it. Anchor 1, total global debt is around $251 trillion, more than 235% of world GDP. That's not an abstract number, it's the interest bill of the world. It's the invisible tax on every government decision. It's why unlimited options quietly become carefully managed risks. Anchor 2, the US lived through a modern inflation shock where consumer prices rose 1% year over year in June 2022. That's not a history lesson. It's proof the monetary system can still erupt when pressure builds. Now, lock in the timeline. On February 3rd, 2026, U.S. forces shot down an Iranian drone that approached the USS Abraham Lincoln while the carrier was operating in international waters roughly 500 miles from Iran's southern coast, at distance not in the tightest geometry of the Gulf. The same day, Iranian boats approached a U.S.-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, ordered it to stop, attempted a boarding, then disengaged as a U. S warship escorted the vessel. Here's the key. These standoffs look like dominance, but function like containment. Not containment of Iran, containment of escalation, containment of cost, containment of political blowback, containment of the one scenario the system fears most. A single miscalculation that drags the machine into a war it cannot afford in the ways that matter, financially, industrially, and socially. And this is why the outcome is not a mystery. It's mathematically inevitable. Because the pattern is not moral, it's mechanical, I'm going to give you the pattern in 4 stages. Memorize it, and you'll start seeing it everywhere, in empires, in markets, even in personal finances. Stage 1 is the setup. Every great power builds a platform that makes influence cheap, usually a currency system, a trade system, and a security system that all reinforce each other. In the modern era, reserve currency gravity, global basing, and the promise that sea lanes remain open, power gets leverage. Stage 2 is expansion, overextension. The platform works so well that the empire begins to confuse the platform for reality. Commitments spread. Guarantees multiply. Enemies become manageable. And the state discovers it can borrow to fund the gap between desire and capacity. The political class learns the bill can be pushed into the future. And so it does. Stage 3 is crisis, loss of control. Not collapse, not sudden defeat. Loss of control. The empire can still strike, but it cannot dictate outcomes. It can still punish, but it cannot stabilize. It can still deploy, but deployment becomes a provocation the adversary can weaponize. Asymmetric actors thrive here because they don't need to win the war. They just need to make it too expensive for the empire to continue. Stage 4 is the inevitable outcome, strategic contraction disguised as choice. The narrative says restraint. The map says pullback. The speeches say de-escalation. The system says risk management. What looks like prudence is often insolvency, financial, political, or moral, expressing itself in foreign policy. Now, proof. 3 case studies, same stages, different centuries, same machine. First, Britain and Suez, 1956. Stage 1, setup. For a century, Britain's platform was global trade and maritime dominance. London was finance. The Royal Navy secured routes. Ports and choke points made influence cheap. Even after World War II, Britain still carried the reflex of command. Stage 2, overextension. World War II hollowed out Britain financially. The empire became expensive to police. The domestic state, expensive to maintain. Sterling weakness and balance of payments pressure were constant. Britain still wanted great power outcomes, but it no longer had great power slack. It was living on credibility. Stage 3, loss of control. Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal. Britain and France, with Israel, plan Operation Musketeer. Militarily, the opening looks successful. But the crisis isn't military, it's financial and diplomatic. The US applies pressure. Markets attack sterling. Britain faces a brutal choice. continue and risk a currency crisis, or stop and preserve the financial core. Stage 4, outcome, Britain backs down and withdraws. And the deeper outcome is structural. The moment the world understood Britain's military could be checked by its financial vulnerability, the platform cracked. Once a limit is revealed, it can't be unrevealed. Second, the United States, Vietnam, and the end of Bretton Woods. Stage 1, setup. After 1944, Bretton Woods builds a monetary architecture where the dollar anchors the system. Post-1945, America has industrial dominance and credibility. The platform makes power cheap because global demand for dollars finances capacity. Stage 2, overextension. In the 1960s, the U.S. tries to run huge domestic programs and a major war at the same time. Great Society plus Vietnam. The reserve currency platform makes it feel painless, but the world isn't sentimental. Foreign holders of dollars start questioning whether those dollars are truly redeemable at the promised rate. Stage 3, loss of control. Gold drains, confidence fractures, and the U.S. hits an impossible triangle. Keep the gold peg, fund commitments, and maintain global trust. You can't have all three forever. Stage 4, outcome, August 1971. Convertibility ends, the gold window closes. Fiat expands. The 1970s bring stagflation, repeated shocks, and eventually brutal interest rate medicine to break inflation psychology. The empire continues, but the platform changes. Financial engineering becomes the tool to postpone reckoning, and postponement becomes policy. Third, the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Different ideology, same machine. Stage 1, setup. The platform is centralized control, heavy industry, and a vast security apparatus. It holds a sphere through coercion and subsidies. Stage 2, overextension. The arms race intensifies, subsidies pile up, productivity stalls. The system has limited flexibility. Then, Afghanistan, 1979, what looks manageable, becomes a grinding drain. Stage 3, loss of control. The war bleeds resources and legitimacy. Meanwhile, economic pressure and stagnation deepen. The USSR can still intimidate, but it can't reform fast enough. It can still deploy, but deployments don't produce stability. Stage 4, outcome, withdrawal in 1989. 2 years later, the Soviet Union dissolves. Afghanistan didn't cause collapse like a single bullet. It expressed a limit that already existed. Once the limit is reached, events don't need to be dramatic. They just need to be continuous. Now, watch what happens when we apply the exact same machine to today. Coldly, step by step, no slogans, no vibes, just system. Stage 1 in the present is the American platform, reserve currency plus global security architecture, the U. S issues the currency the world uses to settle trade and hold reserves. It maintains bases and alliances across continents. Its navy is built to keep choke points open and deter disruptions, and choke points still matter. The Strait of Hormuz moves about 20 million barrels of oil a day, roughly 1/5 of global petroleum liquids consumption, and roughly a quarter of seaborne oil trade. That's not trivia, that's the artery. Whoever influences the artery influences the price of the world's blood. Platform, check. Stage 2 is overextension, and this is where the numbers stop being abstract. U.S. national debt is around $5 trillion. Again, not good or bad as a slogan, just a constraint, a gravitational field that shapes what is possible. Defense authorizations remain massive. Meanwhile, modern deterrence doesn't just cost ships. It costs readiness, munitions, air defense, cyber, logistics, recruitment, and industrial capacity, paid for while interest costs rise and domestic tolerance falls. This is the core of overextension. Commitments stay global while slack becomes local. The empire must do more while the population tolerates less. That gap is where stage 3 grows. Overextension, verified. Stage 3 is crisis, loss of control. And this is where the Iran episode becomes diagnostic, not sensational. Notice the shape of the confrontation. Drone approaches a carrier. A fighter shoots it down after de-escalatory measures. Iranian boats probe a tanker. The tanker accelerates. A U.S. escort arrives. The incident ends without seizure. That is not traditional warfare. It's a sequence of probes designed to create decision traps. If the U.S. ignores the probes, it looks weak, and future probes escalate. If the U.S. responds aggressively, it risks escalation, oil spikes, regional war, domestic backlash, and global economic shock. If the U.S. responds proportionally, it enters an exhausting cycle where each incident consumes attention and political capital without producing decisive outcome. This is stage 3 in one sentence. The empire can still strike, but it can't control the escalation ladder without paying costs that ripple far beyond the battlefield. Loss of control, undeniable. And now stage 4, the part most viewers misunderstand. Backing away is not fear. It's geometry, it's posture, it's distance. It's whether the carrier enters the most constrained waters or stays where it can maneuver. It's whether the mission becomes domination or deterrence at range. Here is the quiet conversion. When a supercarrier becomes a floating political event, the mission shifts from win to avoid catastrophe. One successful asymmetric strike, one mass casualty incident, can reorder domestic politics, global markets, and alliance credibility overnight. And adversaries don't need to sink the ship to win strategically. They only need to force the ship to operate differently. They only need to make the empire defend more than it projects. That's stage 4, strategic contraction, presented as prudence. Distance becomes doctrine. Outcome. Check. Now let's break the spell of the most dangerous sentence in geopolitics. This time is different. It's not an argument, it's a prayer. American exceptionalism does not cancel balance sheets. Modern optimism does not erase the cost of capital. Technology will save us, does not eliminate choke points, supply chains, or the fact that cheap drones and missiles can impose expensive decisions on expensive platforms. In fact, technology accelerates the pattern because it compresses the cost curve. It lets smaller actors impose outsized risk at low price. And when risk becomes cheap for them and expensive for you, the system tilts. Not because you're weak, because you're expensive. So here's the systemic revelation most people avoid. The United States is not simply confronting Iran. It is confronting a world where the old platform no longer guarantees cheap outcomes. When a global platform meets local constraints, escalation control becomes the main mission. And once escalation control becomes the main mission, power stops being about winning and becomes about not losing catastrophically. That is not stability. That is managed decline of optionality. Now, what do you do with this? 3 actionable moves, not slogans. First, stop watching geopolitics like a sports game. It's not who's tougher. It's who can afford the next move. Track the cost of escalation, oil sensitivity, supply chain vulnerability, interest expenses, political polarization. When official language keeps repeating de-escalation, restraint, and avoid widening the conflict, that's the system protecting itself from its own commitments. Remember that. It's a signal. Second, learn to read the probes. In stage 3, adversaries don't aim for victory. They aim for decision traps. Small incidents engineered to force big reactions. Your job as a viewer is to ask one question every time. What reaction would be most expensive for the empire? Because that's the reaction the probe is trying to trigger. Third, position your mind for the next stage. In a world where choke points transmit tension into prices, volatility isn't an anomaly, it's a feature. In a world where debt loads are extreme, credibility and rates become strategic weapons. And in a world where backing away is geometry, markets will repeatedly mistake restraint for stability, right up until the next incident forces repricing. And here's the final warning, stated as cleanly as I can make it. Stage 1 builds a platform that makes power cheap. Stage 2 turns that platform into overreach. Stage 3 exposes the limits through asymmetric crises. Stage 4 forces contraction, quietly, strategically, inevitably. If you want to know what happens next, don't look for a single headline. Look for the next escalation trap, the next shipping incident, the next oil spike, the next measured response that buys time. Because the people who survive systemic shifts are not the people who feel reassured. They're the people who recognize the machine and move before the crowd realizes it's standing on a conveyor belt. So subscribe and watch the next video, because we're going to break down how the machine was built, why the carrier myth persists, even as the system changes, and the 3 indicators that tell you when stage 3 is about to harden into stage 4. You don't need optimism, you need pattern recognition.